Hey guys, it's Bluebo. Just a heads up that there may be some sensitive content in this work. Take a moment if you need to, as things might get a bit hairy. With all that said, I hope you enjoy the performance. Thank you.
Filters of Winchester. Prologue. Dragon. It had all been down to one mistake. As the first of a pair of guards approached the test subject with meal in hand, the officer had failed to notice that he had accidentally torn a small hole in the experiment's straitjacket. The tear was negligible, unnoticeable even to any average captive of the tight clothing binding. But as Dr. Ersatz looked down her nose over the rocky outcropping from which her magnum opus had plummeted into the unforgiving watery depths, she recalled that their captive, the infamous Subject 15, codenamed Aster, had been anything but ordinary. The guards delegated to feeding it were the first to perish. Subject 15 easily crushed the windpipe of one of the officers with arms that still struggled to loosen themselves from the jacket. The second guard had not been quick enough to pull his gun out in defense. Aster beat him to the draw with a thrown pocket knife from the now late officer's belt. The lone guard's throat was impaled with only a pitiful gurgle in response. Subject 15 had been outfitted with a close-fitting titanium helm that offered only the minimum amount of oxygen required. It could only be opened for feeding with a specific key. Even in its near-blind state, Aster's combat instincts and muffled sense of hearing were still enough to allow it to overcome any amount of highly trained guards standing between it and the outside. Dr. Ersatz remembered with pride the ease with which each officer at every turn had been dispatched. Like a misleadingly diminutive shrike dancing in the wind, Aster had struck down all obstacles with the succinct cruelty of a child tearing the wings off a butterfly. The experiment had gone so far as to utilize the body of a wayward desk assistant, bless his soul. He'd stumbled in at the worst possible time, with his only intent being to deliver coffee to the lab's director, to block incoming bullets. Afterward, it simply tossed the assistant's corpse at the guards like cheap trash once the makeshift shield had served its purpose. The slow, meandering stumble Subject 15 had taken while wandering out of the facility, the lackadaisical nature with which it had sifted through its old belongings in the storage room, only to be satisfied with retrieving an old, crumpled photograph, the soft, haunting hum it taunted them with, echoing the dull thrum of classical music they would play in its cell ad nauseum, in the belief that the tones soothed the subject. Every movement of Subject 15 as it attempted escape appeared calculated, planned.
Had she just been toying with us?
Dr. Ersatz wondered in fascination as her crimson manicured nails tapped against the sleeve of her lab coat. The image of their prize test subject reaching the edge of the cliff, the beginnings of chill fall winds brushing against its exposed skin and fiber alloy covering, which masked the inner workings of its prosthetic limbs, burned its way into the doctor's mind once more. The sniper, intent on killing it before it wreaked havoc, had had the perfect shot. However, Aster had noticed the murderous intent, all too similar to its own, and had turned just enough. The bullet, intended to kill, blasted off its titanium helmet, freeing its extensive brown locks and surely causing some sort of brain damage, as the force knocked the experiment off the outcropping and into the murky sea below. Dr. Ersatz knew Aster was still alive. It was all just a matter of finding her. The brunette awoke on a murky shore she didn't recognize. As she slowly rose to her feet, she turned her dull cyan gaze to the crushed, washed-out photograph she'd held close, even as she descended from that cliff. The picture depicted two young adults smiling genuinely against the backdrop of a quaint cafe in London. The red-haired, glasses-wearing woman grinned fondly at the taller gentleman at her side, who appeared to be slightly camera-shy, or perhaps feverish based on his blush.
Claire. Foley.
The robotic humanoid remembered sluggishly.
And next to her.
As the rising sun briefly peeked through the thick clouds, the memory-deprived automaton felt her right eye shut reflexively. The sound of the other night's gunshot still reverberated in her cranium and throbbed against the side of her head. Diverting her attention from the dizzying distraction, the brunette humanoid cast her gaze up to see several men in blue uniforms driving up to the wharf in white vehicles. Seeing the necessity of fleeing and searching for the individuals in the photo elsewhere, the naked automaton slunk back into the water. She swam away from the shore, expecting to find those she sought in a less lonely locale. When next she surfaced, the individual found herself at a sparsely populated harbor. She felt the beginning drops of rain heralding a downpour land on her face as she paddled to the pier. A quick brush over the area revealed a small shack a few steps away from the dock nearest the submerged automaton. After ensuring the ramshackle shed was well and truly abandoned, the robotic humanoid stepped inside to shelter from the rain. All the while, she listened to the slowly waning, startled gasps and calls for retreat in response to the sky opening. Sifting through the scant few drawers and cupboards within the structure rewarded the pragmatic individual with a dusty black raincoat and hat, and a stray kitchen knife. The opportunistic humanoid swiftly donned the rain gear and slipped a blade into her loose-fitting sleeve. A brief glance in the cracked mirror revealed that the brunette was bleeding from the side of her head. She quickly located a roll of bandages and got to work on tending the wound under her hat. The emotionless humanoid felt a burning sensation as she pressed against the bandages to test their security. She made to continue her ransacking when a strangled groan ripped at her attention. Edging open the creaky wooden door, the wary automaton peeked around to spot a pair of surly-looking men assaulting a defenseless gentleman in a top hat. The bruised, battered victim lay prone on the cracked concrete as the uncaring rain began to descend in sheets.
Hey, remember what the boss said?
One of the hoodlums barked over the downpour as he rested his baseball bat across his shoulders.
Guys like him just don't know when to quit.
His partner spat as he brandished a switchblade.
He'll keep giving us trouble if we don't put him out now. Besides, it ain't like we'll get caught, especially in hellish weather like this.
The brunette slipped her photograph into the front pocket of her newly acquired poncho. She advanced towards the two criminals with a newfound resolve in her stride.
Hey, what's this broad doing out here?
The bludgeon-wielding goon wondered. The resolute humanoid revealed the knife in her hand, a warning, as it flashed against the reflection of a faraway bolt of lightning.
You think you can stop this just 'cause you've got a knife too?
The other faceless minion scoffed as he pointed a switchblade at her.
Like you'll even have the chance.
The ruthless automaton took the opportunity offered by the meaningless hoodlums gloating and closed the distance between them, faster than a flicker, and swung the blade upward. The dull kitchen utensil sliced cleanly through the goon's weaponized hand. Before he could even react properly, the merciless fighter clamped her free hand over his throat and forced him to the ground. Sensing the wild approach of the other hoodlum, the brunette turned and crushed the downed man's trachea under her heel before lunging at the remaining target. The ruthless humanoid smoothly ducked under the swing of the enemy's bat. She twirled her knife expertly between her fingers just as another lightning bolt streaked across the sky. The flash of the blade distracted the goon just long enough for the woman to slug into her opponent's jaw with the force of a semi-truck. As he recoiled, the lethal humanoid leapt at the thug and jammed her thumbs into his eyes. As the victim screeched in agony that did not reach the automaton's ears, she slammed her knife into his skull. A moment of nothing passed. The brunette only felt heavy droplets jabbing her body as she pocketed the knife. After looting their pockets for valuable items, the distant automaton unsympathetically tossed the useless bodies into the salty water before turning her attention back to the victimized gentleman. When the woman pressed her fingers to the injured man's neck, a pulse fluttered back, albeit weakly. Through a thorough search of his belongings, the humanoid found a useful piece of information. His address, found neatly written on his faded driver's license. After replacing the personal information in the victim's pocket, the protective maiden delicately shifted her fragile charge onto her back. The distant automaton noticed dimly that the rain had been charitable in deciding to lighten then, as she slowly ushered the professor back to his flat. Herschel had no idea how much time passed when he opened his eyes. Every nerve in his body sang in pain. He was still alive, somehow. As his weary eyes traveled the expanse of the dusty bedroom he'd once felt at home in, he wondered who had decided to bring him here. Glancing to the window, his eyes widened. An effeminate figure with hair brushing past her shoulders gazed out over the soggy rooftops of London. The saffron light from the setting sun obscured her features as she turned back to him, as though she were a celestial being that had offered him another chance, and a familiar being at that.
Claire?
Herschel croaked. He winced as he attempted to rise from his bed.
Herschel.
The angelic entity called softly as she approached.
Claire?
Herschel wheezed as the beginnings of tears formed in the corners of his eyes. As he listened closer, however, the voice of someone familiar filtered out to reveal a different person entirely. The mist in his eyes cleared as he looked upon the woman calling his name.
Professor Herschel Layton,
The emotionless brunette addressed as she approached and knelt at his bedside.
that is your full moniker, is it not?
Something in the way the stranger's cyan eyes stared through him struck the professor as uncanny. As Herschel searched the strange intruder's lifeless gaze, he wondered if perhaps it would have been better had he left after all.